Hey everybody, first impressions of Age of Empires 4. I've played this thing for a couple of hours now. It's a game I've been looking forward to for quite a long time, and when they announced it, I actually had some optimism for it. Not a whole lot, because I knew that Relic Entertainment had really messed up with Dawn of War 3, and I didn't really care much for Company of Heroes 2 either, but to be fair, when I played it, it ran like hot garbage, and, well, it still runs like hot garbage, but at least I have a better computer now than when I first started messing around with it, and thus it'll actually run at something vaguely resembling a playable frame rate. So I'll give that one another try eventually, and then we'll see whether or not my distaste for it back from when I first played it still holds up. As for Age of Empires 4, on the other hand, there are no such performance issues. I know people with better machines than mine are getting worse performance than I am, but I think a lot of that is because this game is very heavily single-threaded, and I'm running an older processor which excels at single-threading, and newer processors aren't really built for that. Ryzen processors in particular are very heavily centered around multi-threading, and so if you get something that is very heavily single-threaded for those, they tend to suffer quite a lot for it. I really don't understand why they programmed the game this way. Multi-threading has been more or less the standard way of programming just about anything for many years now, so there's really no reason this thing should be hammering a single thread so much. And honestly, I should have taken the weird programming nature of the game as prophecy, because when I actually started delving into this thing, I immediately started running into problems, and it wasn't performance related. Performance was fine. Even when I maxed this thing out at my monitor's native resolution of 1080p, it runs perfectly fine. There's no complaints there. What I did complain about immediately is that when I started the game up, it immediately threw me into a tutorial. Didn't take me to the main menu, just immediately dropped me into the tutorial. Which wasn't even a very good tutorial because it didn't start with basic controls. It started with, you need to harvest 50 food, and then it sat there for a bit before eventually giving me a tip. By the way, this is how you select a unit and then you tell them to harvest food. There are several problems with this. The first problem is that under no circumstances should a PC game, certainly a PC exclusive like Age of Empires 4 is, immediately force you into a tutorial. And I will say the exact same thing for literally any PC game I play. It should never, under any circumstances, force the player into going immediately into either the tutorial or the campaign, or technically both in some cases. It should deposit you at the main menu, where you will then be able to mess around with the control settings or the graphics settings to your heart's content. Very rarely do auto-detect settings actually line up with what your hardware is capable of doing and what the game's performance is actually going to be. And funnily enough, that was exemplified when I went into the settings for this game and found that they had all defaulted to medium-low settings, and I couldn't change them while the tutorial was active. It turns out, you can't change your graphics settings while you're playing a match. You have to restart the entire game for them to take effect. That's the kind of crap I would expect from games from about 20 years ago, not so much now. Oh, and it gets better from there. I went ahead and finished the tutorial, then set all my graphics settings to the absolute maximum, and then I did what I normally would do with basically any other strategy game, and hop into the skirmish mode to just test things out and make sure the game's performing smoothly. And immediately I started running into more problems. Like the fact that the game defaults to team colors. Blue for player, yellow for allies, and red for enemies, which is basically the way that Company of Heroes and Dawn of War handled that. Except Company of Heroes and Dawn of War don't have the player color actually mattering during gameplay. The only thing that determines in Company of Heroes and Dawn of War is the color of the units and such on the minimap. When you're actually in-game, it's just whatever colors and uniforms that your faction actually wears. In Age of Empires, your faction color is reflected on your units' uniforms as well as your buildings. And so I went into the options menu and switched that to unique colors, which means that each individual player is going to have a different color. Except there's a problem with that. You can't pick it. It's related entirely to your player slot. So if you're player 1, you're always blue. If you're player 2, you're always red. It goes on and on. So guess what? If you want to play as, I don't know, the English and play as red because that's what makes sense for the English, well, too bad. You're blue. The French are red. Deal with it. Never mind, I guess, that picking your player color has been a feature of the Age of Empires series since the very first game back in 1997. Literally the only game in the series where you could not pick your player color up until now was Age of Mythology, and you know what? It was annoying as hell in that game too, but at least that game was a spin-off, not a mainline entry. And you know what, and this is gonna sound really petty, I know, but only being able to play as blue was one of the reasons I really don't like playing Age of Mythology very much either. The simple fact of the matter is, I don't like playing as blue in real-time strategy games. If it's a matter of the faction itself happens to be blue, then I'll put up with it, but generally speaking, if I have the option to choose my player color, I will pick literally anything that is not blue. And when I say literally any other color, I mean that I would literally rather play puke green as a faction than blue. That is how much I don't like playing as blue in real-time strategy games. The funny part is, I don't even dislike the color blue. I like the color blue just fine. It's just, in real-time strategy games specifically, I really don't like playing as it, and I don't really know why. But the problem with it in this game is not so much just that it forces you to play as blue if you're player 1, and if you're in multiplayer then you're at the mercy of whatever player slot you happen to be in. The problem is that a feature that has been in the series since the original Age of Empires is now missing in Age of Empires 4, and it doesn't stop with the color selector. Want to put yourself up against a bunch of random opponents instead of having to deliberately select each individual faction you're going up against? Can't do it. Want to play an alternate game mode like, say, Regicide or even Deathmatch? Can't do that either. The only option is basic skirmish with a couple of extra victory conditions you can add on. Not particularly interested in playing through the English campaign? Well, too bad. You have to play through at least the first 2 missions to be able to unlock all of the other campaigns. Want to pull up the scoreboard and see what the general score of all the different players is? Too bad. You can only tell what age they're in. Want to have larger games? Too bad. Population cap's 200, end of story. There's absolutely no diplomacy in the game at all, so you can't switch teams or switch from ally to enemy or anything like that. You're just stuck with whatever the teams are at the beginning, and that's it. Not really that big of a loss, but at the same time, it's a feature that was in previous Age of Empires games and is noticeably absent here. They don't have the AI being all of the various historical figures like you would see in all of the previous games, including Age of Mythology, where it would show different mythological characters and such being the faction leaders. Nope, here it's just AI, easy, AI, hard, etc. And of course they don't communicate with you either. At least in previous Age of Empires games, the AI would do things like say, I need food, or I need wood, or they would say things like they're attacking an enemy, or they need assistance, or something like that. Here, they're just completely silent, and they don't even respond to your pings either. And sadly, they don't have an Age of Empires series staple, which is the silly cheat codes where you can do things like spawn cars in and such like that. Here, there are absolutely no cheat codes of any kind, and it remains to be seen whether they're going to implement any. Hell, they didn't even put unit patrolling or waypoints for the units in the game properly. You can set waypoints for a unit, but it doesn't show them, so you just have to remember where you clicked. It's like you're playing the original Age of Empires all over again. And then when you move past the things that are just outright missing, you'll notice things that are just not implemented all that well. Like the user interface is just not very intuitive, and the camera zoom is just a bit too narrow. It needs to be pulled back just a bit. And keep in mind, if I'm saying that at 1080p, it's going to be even worse at 1440p or 4K. And the sad part is, I got so distracted by all of these things that were just missing or not implemented well, that I haven't even gotten to the point where I can reliably run into some of the other issues that people are reporting. Things like the weird glitches with the tech trees, or certain factions' mechanics being kinda broken, or the unit pathing being weird and occasionally glitching to allow them to phase through things that they shouldn't be able to go through, and of course the expected issues with things like faction balancing and all that. And normally I would think to myself that they could sort those issues out over time, but I've also seen reports that a lot of these problems were there during even the very first technical tests, and Relic seems to have done almost nothing about them. And I don't know about you, but for me, that doesn't instill confidence that Relic is going to sort out the issues over time. What it tells me is that either they simply don't have the resources to fix it, which is absurd, because this is Age of Empires and they have the backing of Microsoft in this one. So if it's not a matter of resources, then it's a matter of either the developers just don't give a single solitary crap what the players are thinking because they think they know better than the players do, which is an attitude no developer of any kind should have, and it certainly shouldn't be of one where you've had a series that is as long-running as Age of Empires. People have been playing this series for 24 years at this point. And while I'm not necessarily saying that a developer should take the fanbase's word as absolute gospel, what they should do is pay very close attention to what the longtime fans are saying. Because they're the core audience for this game, whether Relic wants to admit it or not. And that leads me to one of the biggest problems I have with Age of Empires 4, which is that I really have absolutely no idea who this game is actually designed for. On the one hand, it seems like Relic have tried to win over as many people as they possibly can, including people who aren't normally fans of real-time strategy games, with all of the challenges and tutorials and such that are meant to teach you how to play the game, except when you actually go into those, you find out very quickly that if you don't play them basically on an esports level, then the challenges basically judge you in an almost passive-aggressive manner. If you're not able to complete everything in a gold context, then obviously you don't know how to play the game properly, and you need to keep practicing until you're playing it at this really high level. Because clearly we can't just have a real-time strategy game where the people who want to play it competitively can play it competitively, and the people who want to play it casually can play it casually. No, no, no. It's all gotta be about esports now. It's gotta be about playing at a really high competitive level, and if you play at anything lower than that, well, you need to just grind until you get to that level. Never mind, I guess, that Age of Empires 4 doesn't have ranked matches yet, and it doesn't have a solid replay feature that actually functions or anything like that, so you really can't play esports Age of Empires 4 right now. It's all casual matches, which gets pretty crazy because there's no skill-based matchmaking or anything either, so if you're going into a match, you could end up with people who have no idea what they're doing, or people who've been playing the Age of Empires series competitively for 20-something years, and who have everything down to such a fine degree that they will be completely curb-stomping you within the span of a few minutes. So I really don't know if the game is designed for esports players, because it seems like it's trying to push people in that direction, but then it just doesn't have the features that esports players are looking for. So people more interested in the highly competitive side of things are just going to stick with Age of Empires 2, or of course StarCraft 2. And then if you're looking into the more casual side of things, which is where Age of Empires has always historically excelled, then you've got 4 campaigns which have the tone of a documentary, and that's just kind of bland and boring, and not at all how the previous Age of Empires games handled their campaigns. And of course, the skirmish mode I've already talked about is just missing so many features and so much content that it's downright embarrassing. And so you're left with an experience that casual real-time strategy game fans are gonna go into this and find lacking, and then just go play something else that is much more fully featured. So if it doesn't have what casual players are looking for, and it doesn't have what esports players are looking for, who the hell is this game actually made for? And here's a more important question. After everything that I've already told you, all of the missing features, the severe lack of content that's currently in the game, why in the hell would you pay $60 US for this game when you can buy Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition, which has something like 4 or 5 times the content, and which is considerably more refined, has all of the features that are missing, has a tutorial that starts with basic controls and then works its way up from there, and which is completely optional, by the way, you're not forced into it like you are in the Age of Empires 4 tutorial, and which undoubtedly runs a lot better on a much wider variety of systems than Age of Empires 4 could even hope to. Well, there's a very simple reason for it, and honestly, it might be the entire reason Relic was perfectly fine releasing this game in its current state, when it is clearly unfinished. The reason goes something like this. Well, Age of Empires 4 has launched in a rather weak state. They may fix it over time, so let's just hold off on this for now and see what other options are currently available in the market that have been released recently. Oh wait, there aren't any! Oh sure, there are options if you're not looking for a traditional base-building real-time strategy game. And there are options if you are willing to play games that are just remasters or remakes of games that came out well over a decade ago. But over the past decade, I can really only think of a maybe handful of new real-time strategy games that were not just remakes or remasters. And the only one that immediately comes to mind is Grey Goo, which was a bit of a flop from what I can tell. And even that came out 6 years ago at this point. Fans of traditional base-building real-time strategy games have been absolutely starved for new releases over the past decade, and so when something like Age of Empires 4 comes along, obviously they are going to immediately flock to it no matter what state it's currently in. Now whether or not they'll stick with it is a completely different story, and I think a lot of that is going to have to do with what Relic Entertainment does with the game post-launch, because people who've been playing real-time strategy games certainly remember what they did with Dawn of War 3. That game was a mess, and rather than fix the game's issues and put out new content, Relic just abandoned it entirely, and it has just remained this weird wound in the Dawn of War franchise, and we're not entirely sure whether we're ever going to get a Dawn of War 4 as a result. But while we know the story with Dawn of War 3, we don't know how things are going to play out with Age of Empires 4. They could just abandon it entirely like they did Dawn of War 3. Or they could stick with it. They could put out additional DLCs and expansion packs and such, and put in all of the features that are currently missing, and give us the mod support that they say is going to be in the game come next year. We just don't know yet, and that uncertainty has me very worried, because I'm not sure whether Dawn of War 3 was a fluke or not. With the state Age of Empires 4 has launched in, even after 4 years of development, I'm starting to think that Dawn of War 3 wasn't a fluke. I really hope Relic proves me wrong on this. I hope they can pull this game around and turn it into the proper revival of the Age of Empires series that it is really supposed to be. But given how Relic handled Dawn of War 3 and how Age of Empires 4 is at launch, I can't say I'm remotely optimistic about it. I will definitely keep an eye on this game as the development progresses. I'm certainly not going to be reviewing it this close to launch. It'll take me a while to get through all of the campaign content and play enough of the skirmish and some of the multiplayer and such and get an idea for how all that works. And hopefully by the time I do end up reviewing this, they'll have addressed some of the glitches and performance issues and such, and will have put in at least some of the missing features that are very conspicuous by their absence at the moment. But at least with the game's current state, I am extremely disappointed in Age of Empires 4. I hope it improves over time, but it just remains to be seen. Thank you all very much for watching, and if you like my videos, then please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. All the revenue from that goes directly back into the channel, whether it be getting more games for review, or replacing broken equipment, or getting new equipment, or whatever the case may be. If you can't afford to or don't want to, that is perfectly fine, I understand. But the option's there if you're interested. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you all in later videos.